Her name was Sloane Mitchell. She was 34 years old, an American architect who had moved to London 8 years ago for a job and stayed for the life. And on Christmas Eve, in a centuries-old cottage in the Cotswolds, her family gathered from 3 different time zones to tell her she was no longer welcome in her grandmother's estate. Sloane sat in the chair nearest the fire, the chair nobody wanted because it was too warm and faced away from the window. She had sat there every Christmas since she was 12 years old, and she waited. She had known this moment was coming for 2 months. She had read the emails. She had heard the phone calls across the Atlantic. And she had done something her family never expected from quiet, reliable Sloane. She had prepared. But to understand what happened that Christmas Eve, you have to understand what Sloane's life looked like before it. Picture a Tuesday evening in London. Sloane has just finished a 12-hour day at the architecture firm. 3 client presentations, 2 site visits, 1 heated discussion about load-bearing walls with a contractor who didn't want to listen to a woman. Her feet ache from the heels she wears because British clients expect polish. She sits on the tube heading back to her flat in Hampstead, eyes closed, just breathing. Then she checks her phone. 4 messages, all from America. Her mother in Connecticut. "Sloane, honey, your brother needs help with his mortgage payment again. It's just until the restaurant picks up. Can you wire it by Friday?" Her older brother, Tyler. "Hey sis, Mom said you'd cover the mortgage this month. Appreciate it. The new menu is going to turn everything around. I can feel it." Her younger sister, Brooke. "Just checking. You're still handling Gran's property taxes on the cottage, right? Dad said the bill came and it's due next week." Her father. No words. Just a screenshot of an invoice for roof repairs on a house in Vermont that Sloane had never lived in. The house her parents claimed was a family investment that Sloane had been paying for since she was 26. Sloane opened her banking app and did the math she did every single month. Mortgage on Tyler's failing restaurant/house in Portland, $2,400. Property taxes on Gran's cottage in the Cotswolds, £1,800, roughly $2,300. The Vermont house that was supposedly an investment, but somehow never generated income, $1,600. Her parents' supplemental health insurance because her father had retired early and her mother had never worked, $890. Various emergencies that materialized every month like clockwork, another $600 on average. That was $7,790 a month. Nearly 65% of her substantial London salary, the salary she had earned by working 14-hour days and missing every holiday for 3 years straight, the salary her family thought meant she had money to burn. Her flat in Hampstead was nice, yes. It was also the size of a walk-in closet by American standards. She had a bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchen that doubled as a living room. She had furniture she had bought secondhand from a colleague who was relocating. She hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years. Her last vacation was a long weekend in Edinburgh 4 years ago, and she had spent most of it on video calls with her family about a burst pipe in Vermont. She never complained, not once. She had grown up spending summers at her grandmother's cottage in the Cotswolds, a stone house that had been in her grandmother Eleanor's family for 4 generations. Eleanor had married an American serviceman after World War II, moved to Connecticut, raised 3 children, and held on to that cottage like a lifeline to who she had been before. Every summer she brought her grandchildren back, and of all of them, only Sloane had loved it the way Eleanor did. Eleanor had taught her that the cottage was more than property. It was memory. It was roots. It was the kind of inheritance that couldn't be measured in money. So when Eleanor had asked Sloane to take over the property taxes 5 years ago, Sloane had said yes. When her parents had asked her to help with the Vermont house, she had said yes. When Tyler's restaurant had failed the first time and needed a cash infusion, she had said yes. When it failed the second time, she had said yes again. She was the responsible one, the successful one, the one who had made it. She just hadn't realized that to her family, made it meant available for extraction. She was about to find out. Every summer, Sloane flew back to the cottage for 2 weeks. It was the only vacation she allowed herself. She would land at Heathrow on a Friday evening, rent a car, and drive 3 hours through the English countryside to a village so small it didn't appear on most maps. The cottage sat at the end of a lane lined with hedgerows, stone walls covered in moss, a garden that had been tended by 4 generations of women who understood that some things were worth keeping. Eleanor lived there full-time now. She was 91, sharp as a blade, and had refused to move back to America when her husband died 15 years ago. "This is my home," she had told Sloane's father when he suggested selling. "I was born in this house. I'll die in this house. And when I do, it goes to someone who understands what it means." She had never said who that someone was, but Sloane had always known. One particular summer, 2 years ago, Sloane arrived to find her sister Brooke already there. This was unusual. Brooke had visited the cottage exactly twice in her adult life, both times complaining about the lack of reliable Wi-Fi and the nearest Starbucks being 40 minutes away. Brooke was sitting in the garden with Eleanor, flipping through a photo album. She looked up when Sloane walked through the gate. "There she is, the London girl." Brooke's voice was bright and performative. "Gran was just telling me about the history of this place. Did you know the original deed is from 1847? Sloane did know. She had helped Eleanor frame it 3 years ago. "Brooke flew in yesterday," Eleanor said. Her voice was neutral, but her eyes met Sloane's with something that looked like warning. She wanted to see the cottage. "I've been meaning to visit for years," Brooke said. "I just feel so connected to our heritage, you know. This place is so important to our family." Sloane noticed that Brooke was wearing a ring she had never seen before, an emerald set in vintage gold. It looked familiar. "That's beautiful," Sloane said. "Is it new?" Brooke glanced at her hand. "This? Mom gave it to me. Said it was from Gran's jewelry box. Gran said she didn't need it anymore." Sloane looked at Eleanor. Eleanor's face was perfectly still. That ring had belonged to Eleanor's mother. Eleanor had worn it every single day that Sloane could remember. She would never have given it away. But Brooke was already talking about her flight and the rental car and how charming the village pub was, and Eleanor wasn't contradicting her, so Sloane let it go. That was what she did. She let things go. The comments about her career, "Must be nice to live in London while the rest of us struggle." The jokes about her lack of a husband. "Maybe if you weren't so focused on buildings, you'd have time for a family." The way her contributions were expected but never acknowledged, until the night she couldn't let it go anymore. 2 months before Christmas, Sloane received an email that wasn't meant for her. It was from her father to her mother and Tyler and Brooke. He had accidentally included Sloane on the chain. Her email address was similar to Brooke's, one letter different, and autocomplete had made the choice for him. The subject line was, "Cottage Plan, Final Steps." Sloane almost deleted it. Almost. Then she read the first line. "Eleanor signed the new papers yesterday. The solicitor in Cirencester has everything. The cottage transfers to us equally upon her death, with Sloane specifically excluded per Eleanor's wishes. We tell Sloane at Christmas when we're all there." Sloane's hand froze on her mouse. Tyler's reply 3 minutes later. "Perfect. What about the property tax payments she's been making? Do we mention that?" Her mother's reply. "Absolutely not. If she finds out we've been depositing those checks instead of paying the taxes, she'll cause problems. We tell her Eleanor decided the cottage should stay in the direct family line. Sloane's not married, no kids. Eleanor supposedly feels the cottage should go to people who will actually use it." Her father's reply. "Agreed. And if Sloane gets upset, we remind her that she chose to leave America. She can't expect to inherit property she's too busy to visit." Sloane read the chain 4 times. Her hands were shaking by the second read. By the fourth, they were still. The property taxes she had been paying for 5 years, £1,800 per quarter, over £36,000 in total, nearly $46,000. Her family had been taking her money, not paying the cottage's taxes, and pocketing the difference. The cottage probably had a lien on it by now, or worse, and they were planning to take it from her, to forge her grandmother's wishes, to exclude her from an inheritance she had literally been paying for. Sloane sat at her desk in her London office and stared at her computer screen until the words blurred. Then she forwarded the entire chain to a new folder she created, labeled it Evidence, and started planning. 3 days later, Sloane called a solicitor in Cirencester, not the one her family had been using, a different one, an older firm with a reputation for discretion. She explained the situation. She asked what could be done. The solicitor, a woman named Margaret Ashworth, who had been practicing law in the Cotswolds for 40 years, listened without interrupting. Then she asked one question. Has your grandmother ever indicated to you directly that she wants you excluded from her will? No, Sloane said. She's been asking me to visit more. She calls me every Sunday. She sends me photos of the garden. Then I suggest we verify what your father claims before we assume the worst. Margaret made some calls. She visited Eleanor at the cottage, alone, without notifying Sloane's family. And 3 days later, she called Sloane back with information that rewrote everything Sloane thought she knew. Eleanor had not signed any new papers. Eleanor had not changed her will. Eleanor's original will, executed in 2015, left the cottage and its contents to Sloane Mitchell, specifically and exclusively, with a letter explaining that Sloane was the only grandchild who had ever loved the place the way Eleanor did. The papers Eleanor had supposedly signed were forgeries. Someone, likely Sloane's father, had created a new will and somehow convinced Eleanor to sign it by telling her it was something else. A utility form, a property document. Eleanor's eyesight was failing. She trusted her family. She would have signed. But the forged will had never been properly filed. The solicitor who had the documents, the one Sloane's father had mentioned, had noticed inconsistencies and refused to submit them until he could verify Eleanor's intentions. He had been trying to contact Eleanor directly. Sloane's family had been intercepting his calls. Margaret's voice was careful and precise as she laid out the situation. Your family attempted to commit fraud. They failed because one solicitor did his job properly. But they will try again. The question is what you want to do about it. Sloane looked out her office window at the London skyline. The Shard glittered in the winter afternoon light. 8 years ago, she had come to this city with 2 suitcases and a job offer. She had built a career. She had built a life. And her family had spent those 8 years treating her like a cash machine while planning to steal the one thing she actually cared about. I want to go to the cottage for Christmas, Sloane said. I want to be there when they try to tell me I've been cut out. And I want them to understand exactly what they've done. Margaret was quiet for a moment. England doesn't require 2-party consent for recordings. If you're present in a conversation, you can record it legally. Good to know. I should also mention, Margaret continued, that I've discovered some irregularities in the property tax records for the cottage. The taxes haven't been paid in 3 years. The council has been sending notices to an address in Connecticut, your parents' address. There's a charging order being processed. If the back taxes aren't paid within 60 days, the property could be seized. Sloane closed her eyes. Her family hadn't just been pocketing her money. They had put her grandmother's home at risk. The home Eleanor had been born in. The home that was supposed to be Sloane's inheritance. They had nearly lost it through sheer carelessness and greed. How much is owed? Just over £11,000, including penalties and interest. Sloane did the math. She could cover it, barely. It would wipe out her savings, but she could do it. I'll pay it, she said, directly to the council, in my name. I want a receipt. That would establish a clear paper trail showing you've been maintaining the property. It would also strengthen any claim you might make regarding your family's misuse of funds. Good. Sloane hung up and sat very still for a long time. Then she opened the folder she had labeled Evidence and started adding documents. Over the next 6 weeks, she built her case. She gathered every bank transfer she had ever made to her family, 14 years of payments, totaling over $680,000. Mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance premiums, emergency loans that were never repaid, medical bills, car repairs, tuition for Tyler's culinary school, back when everyone thought the restaurant would succeed, tuition for Brooke's MBA that Brooke had dropped out of after one semester. She pulled statements showing the property tax payments she had sent her parents, £36,000 that had never reached the Cotswolds Council. She obtained copies of the forged will from Margaret's contacts. She had a handwriting expert examine the signature. It was Eleanor's handwriting, but the expert noted that it was shaky in a way that suggested she had been signing something she couldn't fully see. She flew to the Cotswolds on a Wednesday in November, telling no one. She rented a car, drove to the cottage, and spent 2 hours with her grandmother in the garden. Eleanor was thinner than Sloane remembered, frailer, but her eyes were still sharp, and when Sloane asked about the papers she had signed, Eleanor's face went pale. "Your father said it was a council form," Eleanor said quietly. "Something about updating the deed with the registry. He read it to me. I couldn't see the print. My glasses weren't strong enough. He said it was routine." "Did he tell you what it actually was?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "I asked to have a copy. He said the solicitor needed to keep everything on file, that I'd get a copy when it was processed." Her voice cracked. "Sloane, what did I sign?" Sloane took her grandmother's hand. The skin was thin as paper, but the grip was still strong. "You signed a new will. One that cuts me out and divides the cottage between Dad and Tyler and Brooke." Eleanor's face crumpled. No, that's not. I would never. Sloane, this cottage is yours. It's always been yours. You're the only one who ever understood." "I know, Gran, I know. You have to fix this. Please. I can't let them take your home." Sloane squeezed her hand. "That's why I'm here. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to sign a new document, a real one, reaffirming your original will. And I need you to do it with witnesses who aren't family. Margaret Ashworth has agreed to come here tomorrow. Can you do that?" Eleanor nodded fiercely. "I'll sign anything you need. And Sloane," her voice dropped, "they've been coming around more lately. Your father, your mother, asking about the cottage, about my accounts, about what I want done when I'm gone. I thought they were just being attentive, but they were measuring the curtains, weren't they?" Sloane didn't answer. She didn't have to. Eleanor squeezed her hand tighter. "Whatever you're planning to do at Christmas, make sure they can't wriggle out of it. The Mitchells have always been good at wriggling." The next day, Margaret Ashworth arrived at the cottage with 2 witnesses, the village postmistress and a retired solicitor who had known Eleanor for 30 years. Eleanor signed a new will, identical to her 2015 will, with one addition, a clause specifically stating that any document signed after this date contradicting these wishes should be considered obtained under duress or through fraudulent means. She also signed a letter, in her own handwriting, explaining exactly what had happened with the forged will and naming her son, David Mitchell, as the person who had deceived her. Margaret filed everything with the probate registry that afternoon. 1 week before Christmas, Sloane flew back to London and started preparing her evidence for presentation. She created a folder for each family member. She printed bank statements, payment confirmations, email chains. She had the forged will, the expert analysis, and Eleanor's signed statement. And she had something else, something she had discovered almost by accident while reviewing her father's emails. 3 years ago, her parents had taken out a loan against the Vermont house, the house that Sloane had been paying the mortgage on. They had used the money to buy a boat, a 40-foot sailboat currently docked in Mystic, Connecticut. Sloane had been paying the mortgage on a house that her parents had already leveraged into a pleasure craft. Total amount Sloane had given her family since she turned 20, $683,000. Total amount that had been used for its stated purpose, approximately $94,000. They had taken over $500,000 from her, and then they had tried to steal the only thing she actually wanted. 4 days before Christmas, Sloane's family began arriving at the cottage. Her parents came first, driving a rental car from Heathrow. Tyler and his wife Madison flew in from Portland. Brooke came alone. She was between boyfriends again, which she mentioned 3 times in the first hour. Sloane arrived last, on Christmas Eve morning. She came with gifts and wine and a smile. She hugged her parents. She complimented Madison's new haircut. She told Brooke her sweater was lovely. She said nothing about what she knew. That evening, after dinner, after the dishes were done, after Eleanor had been helped to her chair by the fire, Sloane's father cleared his throat. "Before we open presents," he said, "we need to discuss something as a family, something important about the cottage." Sloane sat in her chair by the fire and waited. She had been waiting for this moment for 2 months. They had no idea what she had brought in her suitcase. They had no idea what she had spent the last 6 weeks preparing. They were about to find out. The fire crackled in the stone hearth. Outside, snow had begun to fall, rare for the Cotswolds, but fitting for Christmas Eve. The cottage was warm with the smell of mulled wine and roasted chestnuts. By all appearances, it was a perfect holiday scene. Sloane's father stood near the mantelpiece, one hand resting on the stone as if he owned it. Her mother sat on the settee with a glass of wine, her expression carefully sympathetic. Tyler leaned against the doorframe. Brooke was already crying, prepared tears, the kind she had perfected as a teenager when she wanted attention. Eleanor sat in her chair, wrapped in a blanket, watching everything with sharp, careful eyes. "This is difficult," Sloane's father began. "But as a family, we've always believed in honesty. And there's something we need to tell you, Sloane, about Gran's wishes." Sloane kept her face neutral, the same expression she used in client meetings when a contractor was lying about timelines. Calm, present, absorbing. "A few months ago, Gran asked us to come over. She had something important to discuss." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "She's been thinking about the cottage, about what happens to it when she's gone." Her mother dabbed at her eyes, right on cue. "She's decided," her father continued, "that the cottage should stay in the direct family line. Tyler has children. Brooke will have children someday. But you, Sloane, you've built your life in London. You're not married. You don't have kids. Gran feels the cottage should go to people who will actually use it, who will bring the next generation here." Brooke sniffled loudly. Tyler nodded solemnly. "We know this is hard to hear," her father said, "but Gran wanted to tell you herself, surrounded by family, so you'd know it comes from love." Every eye in the room turned to Eleanor. Eleanor's face was perfectly composed. She looked at Sloane, then at her son. "David," Eleanor said quietly, "I think you should let Sloane respond before you say anything else." Her father blinked. That wasn't the script. Eleanor was supposed to confirm. She was supposed to nod and look sad and tell Sloane it was for the best. Sloane let the silence stretch. 10 seconds. 20. Then she stood. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Her voice was level, steady. "I appreciate that you wanted to do this in person." Her father relaxed slightly. This was going better than expected. "Can I ask one question?" Sloane continued. "Of course, sweetheart." "When did Gran tell you this? Specifically?" Her father glanced at her mother. "It was September, I think. Right, Diane? Early September?" Her mother nodded. "We came for a long weekend. Gran said she'd been thinking about it all summer." "September," Sloane repeated. "And she just told you? Out of the blue?" "She'd been considering it for a while. We'd had conversations about the future of the cottage before. This was just making it official." Sloane nodded slowly. "And the document she signed, the new will, that was in September too?" Her father's expression flickered, just for a moment. "Yes, she signed it while we were here. We thought it was important to do it properly." "With a solicitor?" "Yes, Martin Keller, in Cirencester." "Martin Keller," Sloane said. "I've spoken to his office." The room went very still. Her father's hand tightened on the mantelpiece. "You spoke to the solicitor?" "I did, last month. I had some questions about the cottage's property taxes, and I thought he might be able to help. Sloane walked to the sideboard where she had left her bag. She unzipped it slowly. Interesting thing happened during that conversation. She pulled out a folder. Martin Keller never filed the new will. Do you know why? Nobody answered. Because when he reviewed the document, he found irregularities. The signature was shaky, consistent with someone signing something they couldn't clearly see. The witness signatures were dated 3 days apart, which isn't how witness documents work. And when he tried to schedule a follow-up meeting with Gran to verify her wishes, his calls were intercepted by someone who said Gran was too ill to discuss legal matters.